Morrisonville, Illinois. On a crisp winter morning in 1891, Mrs. Culp was simply preparing a fire to warm her home. She grabbed a heavy lump of black coal for the hearth. Raising an iron hammer, she brought it down hard against the rock. She expected the dark stone to shatter into dusty, ordinary fragments. The solid coal split cleanly, but the jagged halves did not fall apart. A glittering 8-carat gold chain held the pieces perfectly together. What she found embedded inside that ancient rock rewrites our entire human timeline. How could a finely crafted piece of jewelry end up encased inside a lump of coal formed hundreds of millions of years ago? Is the human history we've been taught only a fraction of the truth? The journey to uncover ancient mysteries is a long road. Here at Echo Mysteries, we take the truth very seriously. We are strictly committed to ensuring every story is rigorously researched. We strongly encourage you to verify the facts for yourself using the reference links we have carefully provided in the video description below. If you share our deep passion for seeking the truth, please take a brief moment to like, share this video, and subscribe. Every single interaction and comment from you is the vital driving force that motivates Echo Mysteries to keep digging deeper into the shadows. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think is the real origin of this impossible gold chain? Morrisonville, Illinois, 1891. The late 19th century was an era defined by smoke and steel across the American landscape. Southern Illinois served as the beating black heart of this rapid industrial boom. Coal was the undisputed king of the economy. It fueled the massive locomotives crossing the country. It heated the crowded brick homes in freezing winters. Every single day, thousands of miners descended into the suffocating darkness, ripping millions of tons of ancient rock from the earth. Men lived and died by the relentless rhythm of the pickaxe. The coal they extracted was rough, dense, and utterly unyielding. It was a dirty, predictable business. You dug it up, you burned it, and absolutely nobody expected it to hold impossible secrets. Culp certainly did not expect a revelation when she endured another typical Midwestern morning. We already know the brutal swing of her iron hammer. We know the dark rock split cleanly, but we must look much closer at the terrifying anomaly that emerged from the coal dust. The Morrisonville Times officially documented this bizarre event on June 11, 1891. It was not a passing town rumor. It was recorded local history. When the hard coal broke apart, it did not shatter into random shards of debris. It separated flawlessly into two distinct halves. Nestled perfectly within the newly exposed core was an intricate piece of jewelry. It was an 8-carat gold chain. The golden chain measured exactly 10 inches in length. It was crafted with undeniable human precision. The links were delicately formed, displaying a level of metallurgy that was highly deliberate. It shimmered brilliantly against the dull, ancient blackness of the fossilized carbon. This was not a raw nugget of precious metal pulled from a stream. This was a manufactured artifact. It belonged in a velvet box inside a modern jeweler's display case. Yet, there it rested. It was entirely trapped inside a solid lump of raw fuel. But here is where the story defies explanation. To understand the sheer impossibility of this golden object, we must consult the United States Geological Survey. We have to look at the absolute bedrock of scientific reality, the massive coal veins of Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Oklahoma are not recent subterranean formations. They belong almost exclusively to the Carboniferous period. This specific geological era occurred approximately 300 to 360 million years ago. This was a deeply incomprehensible epoch. It was a violent time long before the first dinosaurs ever walked the planet. Thick, swampy forests dominated the primordial American landscape. Over eons, thick layers of dead vegetation were crushed under unimaginable geological pressure. This immense weight slowly transformed decaying organic matter into hard, combustible stone. The process takes millions upon millions of years. The scientific timeline is absolute. The timeline is merciless. Skeptics naturally attempt to propose the most comforting answer. Could a careless Victorian miner have simply dropped his watch chain into the transport cart? No, the physical evidence completely obviates that easy theory. The gold chain was not found resting on the exterior dusty surface of the coal. It was not mixed in with the loose soot at the bottom of the metal scuttle. The 10-inch artifact was entirely embedded deep inside the solid mass of coal. The ancient coal had literally formed around the golden links over millions of years. The rock itself bore the perfect coiled impression of the jewelry within its hollowed center. You cannot drop a delicate gold chain into a solid piece of stone. It is physically impossible. Someone, or some highly advanced thing, dropped that chain into a primordial swamp 300 million years ago. The Morrisonville discovery could easily be dismissed as a singular, elaborate hoax or a forgotten piece of jewelry. But the deep earth was not finished surrendering its impossible secrets to the modern world. By 1912, the relentless hunger for fossil fuels had only intensified. Power plants were rapidly springing up. In Thomas, Oklahoma, the municipal electric plant was operating at maximum capacity to keep the lights on. Frank J. Kennard was a simple employee tasked with tending the massive, roaring furnaces. His daily routine was grueling and dirty. He shoveled endless mountains of black rock into blazing fires. One particular lump of coal caught his attention because it was simply too massive to fit through doors. Kennard grabbed a heavy sledgehammer. He stepped back and struck the oversized chunk with tremendous force. The dense stone split apart with a sharp crack. But Kennard immediately realized something was utterly wrong. A dull metallic clatter echoed sharply against the brick walls of the boiler room. An object had fallen directly out of the shattered core of the coal. It was a solid iron cup. It was not a broken piece of modern mining equipment or a stray tool in the delivery bin. It was a perfectly formed, flat-bottomed iron vessel. Kennard stared at the dark, heavy pot. He knelt down to examine the two fresh halves of the broken coal. The interior of the rock bore the exact, smooth-molded impression of the cup. The iron wasn't just near the coal, it was one with it. This is where the narrative sharply pivots from a bizarre workplace anecdote to a legally documented historical anomaly. Skeptics routinely dismiss these deep mine accounts as the vivid, exaggerated imaginations of exhausted laborers. But Kennard aggressively refused to let his discovery fade into local folklore. Decades later, in 1948, he took a drastic step to cement his story into the public record. He submitted a legally binding, heavily scrutinized, and notarized affidavit swearing to the exact events of that morning. He staked his entire permanent reputation on the absolute truth of his claim. He also meticulously tracked the exact origin of that specific batch of fuel. The oversized lump had been recently and directly excavated from the sprawling Wilburton mines. Geological records for this specific subterranean region are incredibly precise and entirely undisputed. The coal extracted from the deep Wilburton veins was formed during the Pennsylvanian epoch. This uncompromising scientific fact puts the formation of that specific rock at precisely 312 million years ago. Let that apocalyptic number truly sink into your mind. According to every established archaeological textbook, the most advanced life forms crawling across the earth were primitive amphibians. There were absolutely no human beings. There were certainly no blacksmiths building extreme heat kilns to forge iron vessels. Yet, a distinctly manufactured iron pot was completely entombed inside a solid block of carboniferous stone. It requires a staggering amount of heat, specialized tools, and advanced metallurgical knowledge to smelt raw iron. You do not get a symmetrical, flat-bottomed metal cup from a random natural geological accident. It implies a conscious, highly intelligent manufacturing process. If the geological dating of the Wilburton mine is accurate, the official historical timeline is completely shattered. Upshur County, West Virginia, 1944. The jagged ridges of the Appalachian Mountains conceal some of the oldest coal seams in North America. In this isolated region, The black rock was more than just industrial fuel. It was an inescapable way of life. It heated every solitary home through brutally freezing mountain winters. 10-year-old Newton Anderson was simply completing a mundane daily chore. He was sent down into the damp, poorly lit basement of his family home. His job was to stoke the roaring furnace. He picked up an exceptionally large lump of bituminous coal from the delivery pile. The heavy rock slipped from his small, dusty hands. It crashed violently onto the hard concrete floor of the cellar. The dense stone fractured into several pieces, but amid the scattering black debris, something else immediately caught the boy's eye. A distinctly metallic shine reflected the dim basement light. Newton reached down into the soot. He pulled out an object that absolutely did not belong in the Appalachian earth. It was a bell, but unlike the crude iron cup found in Oklahoma, this artifact was incredibly intricate. It was flawlessly cast from a specialized brass alloy. The internal clapper was forged from solid iron. The most incomprehensible detail, however, was the highly ornate figure resting atop the handle. It was a humanoid figure kneeling with distinct avian wings. Researchers would later identify this precise iconography. It was Garuda. Garuda is a mythical, bird-like deity deeply embedded in ancient Hindu and Buddhist traditions. It belongs on the other side of the globe. You do not find Eastern religious deities encased in West Virginian coal veins. The geological dating for the Upshur County coal deposits places their formation squarely in the Carboniferous period. This means the rock holding the bell was roughly 300 million years old. During that incomprehensible epoch, the Appalachian region was an endless, terrifyingly hostile prehistoric swamp. There were no humans. There was certainly no transatlantic trade bringing Asian religious artifacts to prehistoric North America. Now, listen carefully to how the establishment responds. The scientific community despises a chronological anomaly. Organizations like the National Center for Science Education eventually analyzed the accounts of the Upshur Bell. They did not see a world-shattering mystery. They saw a simple, localized misunderstanding. Their explanation was brutally mundane. The establishment concluded that the artifact was nothing more than a mass-produced Victorian-era dinner bell. They argued that a previous resident or a careless delivery worker simply dropped the brass object into the modern coal chute. Over several years, damp coal dust and chemical moisture compacted tightly around the discarded metal. This natural chemical process created a hardened, black outer shell. To a 10-year-old boy in a dark basement, this hardened crust merely looked and felt exactly like ancient, solid stone. The establishment insists the rock was never 300 million years old. They declared the case completely and permanently closed. Contamination by modern debris is the ultimate defense against the impossible. But does a temporary crust of wet coal dust truly shatter with the identical violent force of a solid prehistoric stone? If it was merely a fragile, recent shell of compacted dirt, why did it require a heavy drop onto solid concrete to finally break it open? Webster County, Iowa, the spring of 1897. The Lehigh coal mine was a claustrophobic nightmare of suffocating dust and perpetual darkness. Miners descended exactly 130 feet beneath the Midwestern topsoil every single day. They worked tirelessly by the dim, flickering light of primitive oil lamps. It was a hostile environment completely devoid of human comfort. A solitary miner was intensely hacking away at a stubborn, pristine vein of bituminous coal. He drove his heavy iron pickaxe into the solid black wall. A massive chunk of the carbonized rock dislodged from the earth. It fell heavily to the damp, uneven floor. The rock split naturally down an internal fault line. What emerged from the fractured coal was not a glint of precious metal. It was a slab of strangely distinct, dark gray stone. This was no ordinary geological formation. The stone measured exactly 2 feet in length and 1 foot in width. It was precisely 4 inches thick. Nature produces flat stones constantly, but nature does not manufacture deliberate Mathematical art. The entire surface of this heavy slab was covered in flawlessly etched geometric diamond patterns. Right in the very center of these intersecting lines was a terrifyingly clear carving. It was the distinct, deeply engraved face of an old man. The facial features were anatomically precise. The proportions were entirely deliberate. This object was undeniably crafted by a highly skilled, intelligent artisan. The Omaha Daily News publicly documented this bewildering discovery on April 2, 1897. The artifact immediately became a localized sensation. People stared in absolute disbelief at the intricate face looking back from the abyss of time. Now, look closely at the terrifying implications of its location. You cannot simply lose a 2-foot, heavy stone slab down a narrow mining shaft without noticing. You certainly cannot force it into a solid, unyielding wall of subterranean coal. The Lehigh miner extracted this object directly from an undisturbed, sealed vein. The dark gray stone was fully encased, heavily cemented within the surrounding black fuel. The geological strata at 130 feet deep in Iowa do not belong to recent human history. This specific coal bed was forged deep within the Paleozoic era. The raw rock encasing the carved face is hundreds of millions of years old. The mainstream establishment immediately rushes to the most predictable, comfortable defense. They confidently declare it an elaborate, desperate hoax. They suggest the exhausted miner simply carved the stone himself to gain fleeting local fame. But that mundane explanation entirely ignores the brutal, physical reality of 19th century mining. A laborer working endless, agonizing shifts does not have the time, the specialized chiseling tools, or the adequate lighting to execute a flawless geometric masterpiece 100 feet underground. Furthermore, the surrounding coal bed was completely intact before the strike. There were absolutely no vertical fissures. There were no ancient, collapsed sinkholes. Above it, the earth was sealed tight. The carved face did not gradually sink into the earth from an early Native American settlement. It was already resting there when the towering prehistoric forests collapsed and died. The immense geological pressure of the ages slowly transformed the rotting vegetation into black coal, swallowing the carved slab whole. Someone with advanced tools, profound artistic skill, and a deep understanding of geometry left a monument in the dirt. They left it in an era when science insists only primitive, brainless amphibians crawl through the mud. The existence of this single stone completely dismantles our entire understanding of biological evolution. Scranton, Pennsylvania, 1881, the booming anthracite capital of the entire world. The massive deep shaft mines here were entirely different from the shallow pits of the Midwest. This was the undisputed epicenter of American industrial might. Thousands of weary immigrants vanished underground into the suffocating darkness for brutal 14-hour shifts. The dust coated their lungs. The immense geological pressure in the Lackawanna Valley produced a distinct type of fuel. Anthracite is incredibly dense, hard, and burns hot. It is a completely unforgiving material. A local breaker boy, whose sole, agonizing daily duty was to manually smash large chunks of this premium rock, sat amidst the relentless industrial noise. He swung his heavy iron mallet down onto a particularly stubborn piece of pure black anthracite. The solid stone finally cracked under the immense physical strain. It did not break into ordinary jagged splinters. The massive rock sheared cleanly in half, exposing a perfectly preserved cavity within its ancient core. Resting silently inside this hollow space was a distinctly mechanical object. It was a small, multi-toothed metallic gear. The artifact was roughly 2 inches in diameter and possessed exactly 14 perfectly angled cogs. It was manufactured from a hardened iron alloy that boldly defied the damp, corrosive environment of the deep earth. This was not a random geological concretion naturally masquerading as a human tool. It was a complete anomaly. The symmetrical precision of the interlocking teeth was entirely undeniable. The edges were sharply defined, cut with a level of microscopic exactness that belonged in a modern clockmaker's brilliantly lit workshop, not buried 1,000 feet beneath the heavy Appalachian soil. Someone carefully designed this, but here is where the investigation takes a truly disturbing turn. The sheer depth of the Lackawanna coal veins completely eliminates any rational possibility of recent contamination. The anthracite fields of Pennsylvania are firmly dated to the late Carboniferous epoch by every single reputable geologist. That means the solid black rock encasing this mechanical gear was formed roughly 300 million years ago. During that incomprehensible timeline, the surrounding geography was an unforgiving, prehistoric swamp, teeming with monstrous insects and archaic amphibians. There was absolutely no industrial manufacturing occurring on the planet. There were no advanced civilizations forging intricate iron alloys to power complex machinery. Yet, this precisely cut gear was securely petrified inside the raw fuel. The unyielding coal had literally petrified around the metal over endless millions of agonizing years. The academic establishment is terrified of anachronistic engineering. They predictably claim these metallic anomalies are simply broken pieces of contemporary 19th century mining equipment. They stubbornly argue a modern gear merely fell into the dirt and was quickly coated by hardened coal dust. But that desperate, localized hypothesis completely ignores the fundamental physics of petrification. A soft layer of damp soot does not require a heavy iron mallet to break apart. The gear was not resting casually in a puddle of loose mud. It was violently extracted from the solid, petrified heart of the absolute hardest coal on the entire planet. You cannot artificially fake the immense, crushing geological pressure required to fuse pure petrified carbon seamlessly around a machined iron cog. Science demands a much better answer than convenient excuses. The official human timeline is broken. The most terrifying discoveries do not always fit casually inside a miner's dusty pocket. Some anomalies are so impossibly massive that they threaten to tear down the entire foundation of modern geology. Bear Creek, Montana, 1928. The sprawling Atlas coal mine was driving deep subterranean shafts into the unyielding crust of the Rocky Mountains. The night shift was a relentless, grueling grind of dynamite and heavy machinery. A crew of exhausted laborers was slowly carving their way through an incredibly rich, highly compressed vein of carboniferous coal. They set a routine explosive charge to break through a particularly stubborn rock face. They retreated, detonated the black powder, and waited for the suffocating smoke to clear. They expected to find massive piles of shattered, raw fuel ready for the transport carts. They found something else entirely. As the heavy dust settled in the dim cavern, the miners cautiously approached the newly blasted rock face. The violent explosion had not just shattered the dense coal, it had completely exposed a hidden surface buried directly behind the prehistoric carbon layer. It was not a random geological fault line. It was a perfectly constructed, sheer wall of smooth concrete. The miners raised their flickering oil lamps and wiped the ancient soot from the surface in disbelief. The massive structure was composed of identical, perfectly cubic blocks stacked in an undeniable geometric pattern. The face of each concrete block was polished to an almost mirror-like finish that defied the abrasive subterranean environment. Running meticulously between the heavy stones was a highly complex mortar heavily laced with an unidentified, gleaming metal. This was not a lost trinket or a broken gear. It was a deliberate, monumental piece of architecture, entombed hundreds of feet beneath the American wilderness. To fully grasp the apocalyptic implications of this structure, you must look at the surrounding rock. The Atlas mine was operating in a deep geological stratum that firmly predates the Jurassic period. The coal bed violently sealing off this concrete barricade was over 300 million years old. The massive blocks were not buried under loose, recent topsoil. They were hopelessly locked inside a petrified mountain of prehistoric organic matter. The surrounding coal had literally grown and hardened tightly around the smooth architecture over millions of years of cataclysmic geological pressure. It implies an advanced civilization was pouring polished concrete and smelting metallic mortar during an era when the oceans were filled with primitive, brainless predators. The academic establishment predictably panicked at the sheer, undeniable scale of the Bear Creek anomaly. You can confidently dismiss a tiny brass bell as a careless modern accident. You can casually write off a small iron cup as an elaborate laborer's hoax. You absolutely cannot forge a massive subterranean wall of polished concrete while working a grueling 14-hour shift in absolute darkness. Instead of investigating the impossible, authorities rapidly classified the sighting as a bizarre natural limestone deposit. They confidently argued that immense tectonic pressure simply fractured the Earth into perfect, repeating squares. But blind nature does not pour identical concrete cubes. Unconscious geological friction does not magically synthesize metallic binding agents in perfectly straight, horizontal lines. The official explanation is a desperate, intellectually bankrupt attempt to maintain a shattered historical paradigm. If a massive, manufactured concrete wall existed 300 million years ago, it means our entire understanding of human evolution is not just slightly flawed. It is completely, irrevocably, fabricated. We are looking at the ghostly, petrified fingerprints of a cataclysmic, highly advanced society that was entirely vaporized by the relentless march of deep geological time. They built massive structures, they mined the earth, and then, they were swallowed whole by the very swamps that would eventually become our modern fuel. But none of this is the deepest mystery. Across the American continent, the deep earth silently remembers. We arrogantly believe our modern civilization is the absolute pinnacle. We confidently write our brief, comfortable historical timeline. We aggressively dismiss any physical anomaly that shatters our textbooks. But the endless ancient rock beneath our cities refuses to lie. The subterranean depths of this country conceal a completely erased genesis. We are clearly not the first architects to walk here. Were these impossible objects merely bizarre geological accidents? Or are we simply the newest ghosts wandering blindly over the petrified ashes of a forgotten world?